If there's one quiet truth most men never hear, it's that performance in intimacy doesn't begin in the bedroom. It begins long before it, in the way you prepare your body, your mind, and even the way you care for yourself when nobody is watching. And tonight, you're going to understand a nighttime oil routine that isn't just about physical wellness, but about building deeper confidence, stronger presence, and a calm kind of attraction that women feel before anything is ever said. There is a shift that happens when a man starts treating his body like something he respects, instead of something he pushes past. And this shift is often invisible at first, but becomes unmistakable over time, especially in intimate relationships where presence matters more than pressure. The idea of a nighttime oil routine might sound simple on the surface, but when you understand what it does beyond the physical layer, you begin to see why so many cultures quietly used oils, massage, and evening rituals as part of masculine vitality for centuries. This is not about quick fixes or exaggerated claims, but about creating conditions in your body that support better circulation, reduced stress, improved relaxation, and a calmer nervous system, all of which play a far greater role in intimate performance than most people realize. When a man ends his day with tension stored in his shoulders, fatigue in his mind, and overstimulation from screens or stress, the body carries that into every interaction, including intimacy. The nighttime oil routine begins with something deceptively simple, the act of slowing down. Warm oil, whether it is natural herbal oil or a light massage blend, is not just applied to the skin, it is used as a tool to signal the body that the day is over. As the hands move slowly across the skin, especially around areas where tension accumulates, like the neck, shoulders, chest, and lower back, the nervous system begins to shift from alert mode into recovery mode. This is where real transformation starts. Not in performance techniques, but in recovery and regulation. What many men don't realize is that confidence in intimacy is not built during the moment itself, but in the hours and habits leading up to it. When the body is relaxed, when blood flow is steady, when the mind is not racing, everything becomes easier naturally. The oil routine works as a bridge between stress and calm, between mental noise and physical presence. Even the simple act of self-massage before sleep can improve sleep quality, and sleep is directly tied to hormone balance, energy levels, and overall vitality. These are not abstract concepts. They are biological foundations that quietly influence performance without demanding attention. There is also a psychological layer that often goes unnoticed. When a man consistently engages in a nighttime self-care ritual, he begins to develop a deeper awareness of his own body. This awareness translates into better control, not in a mechanical sense, but in a grounded and steady sense of presence. Women often respond not to exaggerated effort, but to calm confidence, the kind that does not rush, does not force, and does not seek validation in every moment. This routine subtly builds that energy over time. As the oil warms against the skin, the tactile feedback helps reconnect the mind with the body. In modern life, many men are disconnected from physical awareness due to constant mental stimulation. This routine brings that awareness back in a gentle way. The breathing slows, the shoulders drop, and the internal pressure that builds throughout the day begins to dissolve. In this state, the body is not preparing for performance, it is preparing for restoration. And paradoxically, that is what leads to better performance when the time comes. There is also an often ignored connection between stress and performance. High stress levels trigger hormonal responses that can interfere with stamina, focus, and responsiveness. By introducing a consistent calming ritual at night, the body begins to associate evening time with relaxation rather than mental overload. Over time, this conditioning can reduce anxiety around intimacy itself, making interactions more natural and less mentally pressured. But perhaps the most important aspect of this routine is not what it does externally, but what it changes internally in how a man sees himself. When you take time to care for your body in a focused and intentional way, you begin to build self-trust. And self-trust is one of the most underrated elements of attraction. It is not loud, it does not need to be proven, but it is deeply felt. A man who is grounded in his own body tends to carry a quiet assurance that naturally draws people in, not through force, but through stability. Building on that foundation, the real depth of this nighttime oil routine begins to reveal itself when you stop seeing it as a simple self-care habit and start recognizing it as a form of nervous system training that reshapes how your body responds to stress, rest, and closeness over time. Most men underestimate how much their daily tension accumulates physically, not just mentally, and how that accumulation silently interferes with energy, focus, and the ability to remain fully present in intimate moments. The shift begins when the evening is no longer treated as just the end of the day, but as a deliberate transition into recovery, where every action signals the body to downshift from survival mode into restoration mode. In this deeper phase of the routine, the use of oil is less about the substance itself and more about the ritual of touch combined with awareness. When warm oil is introduced to the skin, it creates immediate sensory feedback that draws attention outward from the racing thoughts of the mind and back into the physical experience of being in a body. This is where many men experience something unexpected. At first, the mind may resist slowing down, replaying conversations, stress, or unresolved tasks from the day. But gradually, with consistent practice, the body begins to win that internal negotiation. The breathing becomes heavier but calmer. The jaw relaxes without conscious effort, and the shoulders begin to drop, as if they are finally allowed to release what they were holding all day. What is often overlooked is how deeply connected the nervous system is to intimate performance. When the body is constantly in a heightened state of alertness, even subtle stress signals can disrupt natural responsiveness and emotional connection. But when the nervous system is regularly guided into a calmer state, through intentional evening rituals like this, the body becomes more adaptable, more responsive, and less reactive. This does not create forced change. It creates conditions where natural function can return without resistance. As the routine continues, attention naturally shifts to areas where tension tends to accumulate most in men. The neck and shoulders often carry emotional weight from responsibility and decision-making. The chest can hold a subtle sense of pressure, linked to unexpressed emotion or mental fatigue. The lower back often reflects physical strain from long hours of sitting or standing. When these areas are gently engaged with slow, intentional movement, something subtle begins to happen. It is not just muscle relaxation. It is a form of communication with the body that says it is safe to let go. Over time, this repeated message of safety becomes internalized, and when the body feels safe consistently, it no longer operates from a defensive posture. This is where real transformation in presence begins. A man who is not carrying constant physical tension tends to move differently, breathe differently, and respond differently in close emotional or physical situations. There is less urgency, less internal pressure, and more natural flow. That shift alone can completely change the quality of intimacy, because presence becomes more important than performance. Another important layer of this practice is timing. When done too early in the evening while the mind is still fully active, the body may not fully absorb the transition. But when done closer to the natural wind-down period, where external stimulation has reduced, the effects become more pronounced. The body begins to associate the routine with sleep preparation, and sleep itself becomes deeper and more restorative. This matters because sleep is one of the most powerful regulators of energy, mood, and overall vitality, all of which indirectly shape intimate confidence and endurance. There is also a quiet psychological reinforcement that develops with repetition. Each night that a man follows this routine, he is reinforcing a message to himself that he is worth taking care of, that his body deserves attention, and that slowing down is not weakness but intelligence. This internal narrative shift is subtle, but over weeks and months it builds a stronger foundation of self-respect. And self-respect is often the hidden base of attraction because it shapes how a person carries themselves, even when they are not trying to be noticed. Interestingly, many men report that after establishing consistent nighttime rituals like this, their overall stress reactivity decreases. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel more manageable. This is not because external life has changed, but because the internal threshold for stress has been recalibrated. When the nervous system is no longer constantly overactivated, emotional stability improves, and that stability naturally translates into more grounded interactions with a partner. There is also a subtle but powerful link between physical touch and emotional openness. Even when performed alone, intentional touch during this routine helps restore a sense of connection with the body that modern life often disrupts. This reconnection is important because intimacy is not only about physical interaction with another person, but also about being comfortable and present within your own physical experience. When that internal comfort increases, external intimacy becomes less pressured and more natural. As the routine deepens into consistency, it begins to function almost like a reset button at the end of each day. The body learns to recognize the sequence of actions as a signal that it is time to release accumulated tension. Over time, this conditioning becomes automatic, meaning that even before the routine begins, the body starts to relax in anticipation of it. This is where habit becomes transformation, because the change is no longer dependent on effort alone, but on internal expectation. And perhaps the most important realization that emerges in this stage is that improvement in intimacy is rarely about adding more effort in the moment itself. Instead, it is about removing the internal barriers that prevent natural expression from flowing freely. Tension, fatigue, stress, and mental distraction are often the real obstacles. When those are reduced through consistent evening care, what remains is a more grounded, responsive, and naturally confident version of yourself. At this point in the journey, we have only begun to explore how deeply this nighttime oil routine can influence not just physical readiness, but emotional presence and internal stability. In the next part, we will go even further into how this practice begins to reshape confidence, connection, and long-term intimacy dynamics in ways most men never expect when they first begin something as simple as a nightly ritual. As this routine becomes a consistent part of a man's nights, something quieter but far more powerful begins to change, and it is not just the body that adapts, but the entire way he relates to himself, to rest, and eventually to intimacy itself. What started as oil on the skin and slow movements across tired muscles gradually becomes a psychological anchor, a signal that the day does not end in exhaustion or mental clutter, but in deliberate restoration. This is where confidence begins to shift from something you try to project into something you naturally carry without effort. Over time, the nervous system stops treating evenings as an extension of stress. Instead, it begins to recognize a predictable pattern of release. This predictability is important because the human body thrives on rhythm. When rhythm is absent, the body stays alert, scanning, reacting, never fully settling. But when rhythm is introduced through a repeated calming ritual, the internal system begins to trust that relaxation is not temporary, but guaranteed. That trust alone reduces subconscious tension that many men do not even realize they are carrying into their relationships. At this stage, the impact becomes more noticeable in emotional presence. A man who is no longer overwhelmed by internal noise becomes more attentive, more grounded in conversations, and less likely to be mentally absent even when physically present. This carries directly into intimacy, where presence is often more influential than technique or effort. When the mind is not fragmented, connection deepens naturally because attention becomes stable rather than scattered. And stability in attention is one of the most powerful forms of attraction because it creates a sense of safety and being genuinely seen. There is also a deeper hormonal and physiological ripple that comes from consistent relaxation before sleep. When the body regularly transitions into a calm state, sleep quality improves, and with better sleep comes improved energy regulation, mood balance, and natural vitality. These elements do not just affect daytime productivity. They quietly shape how a man feels in his own body during intimate moments. Fatigue, irritability, and mental fog diminish, allowing more natural responsiveness and ease. But perhaps the most overlooked transformation is internal identity. A man who consistently cares for himself in private begins to shift how he defines masculinity. Instead of associating it only with endurance, pressure, or constant output, he begins to associate it with control, awareness, and calm strength. This does not reduce masculinity, it refines it. It removes unnecessary noise and replaces it with intentional presence. That kind of internal shift is subtle, but it is deeply reflected in behavior, posture, tone of voice, and the energy others perceive. In intimate relationships, this transformation often manifests as reduced performance anxiety. Not because the stakes feel lower, but because the internal pressure to perform perfectly starts to dissolve. When a man is no longer disconnected from his body, he does not approach intimacy as a task to succeed at, but as an experience to share and feel. That difference changes everything. Pressure narrows experience, but presence expands it. The nighttime oil routine also strengthens emotional regulation in a way that directly supports intimacy. Emotional reactivity is one of the silent disruptors of connection. When a person is easily overwhelmed internally, even small misunderstandings can create distance. But when the nervous system is regularly trained into calm states, emotional recovery becomes faster. This means less lingering tension after stressful moments and more ability to return to connection without carrying emotional residue forward. Another important layer emerges in how touch is perceived. As the body becomes more familiar with intentional, slow, grounding touch during the routine, sensitivity and awareness increase, not in an exaggerated sense, but in a more refined, attuned sense. This heightened awareness of physical sensation naturally enhances the ability to stay present during closeness with a partner, making experiences feel more connected, rather than rushed or distracted. What makes this practice powerful is not complexity, but consistency. It does not demand extreme effort or drastic change, but it rewards repetition with compounding results. Each night reinforces the same message to the body: slow down, release, restore. Over time, that message becomes the default state rather than an occasional escape from stress. And when calm becomes the default, everything else in life, including intimacy, begins to operate from a more stable foundation. There is also a quiet emotional maturity that develops through this kind of self-discipline. Taking time at the end of each day to care for your own body creates a form of accountability that does not rely on external validation. It builds a private relationship with yourself that is rooted in respect rather than neglect. And when that internal relationship improves, external relationships often become healthier as well, because they are no longer driven by neediness or internal imbalance, but by choice and presence. Ultimately, what this nighttime oil routine represents is not just a method for physical relaxation. but a reconditioning of how a man enters rest, how he carries stress, and how he shows up in moments of closeness. It replaces urgency with calm, replaces tension with awareness, and replaces fragmented attention with grounded presence. And in the context of intimacy, those shifts matter far more than any surface-level technique ever could. So when you step back and look at the full picture, this is not about oil at all. It is about what happens when a man begins to treat his own well-being as something worth consistent attention. It is about the gradual return to a body that feels safe, a mind that feels steady, and a presence that feels fully available. And when those three align, intimacy stops being something you try to get right and becomes something you naturally experience with depth, ease, and confidence.